I had always believed that my life was ordinary, simple, and steady. Every evening, after a long day at work, I would come home to the comfort of my apartment, expecting the familiar routine, warm greeting, maybe a kiss, and dinner prepared by my wife, Emma. Things were good. We had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? I thought we were happy, and nothing in my world seemed out of, but that evening, everything felt different. It wasn't the usual soft, welcoming atmosphere that greeted me when I stepped inside. I noticed a strange coldness in the air. There was no music playing, no sound of her humming in the kitchen, and worst of all, no warm embrace waiting for me at the door. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her. She was sitting on the couch. I set down my keys, trying to push away the uncomfortable feeling building up inside me. Maybe she had a long day at work too, or maybe she was just tired. But there was something about the silence in the room that didn't sit right with me. Normally, Emma would have noticed me by now, greeted me with that warm smile of hers, and, instead, I cleared my throat. "Hey, Emma," I said, my voice just above a whisper. I expected her to look up and smile, but she didn't. Her eyes remained glued to the screen. Emma. I called again, this time louder, more insistent. She finally shifted, but only enough to look at me briefly before returning to whatever she had been doing. "Yeah," she muttered, her voice distant. There was no warmth, no enthusiasm, just a curt acknowledgement that I existed, but only in the most obligatory way. Something in my chest tightened. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I had this gnawing feeling, an uncomfortable sensation that something was terribly wrong. For a moment, I just stood there, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Was she mad at me? Did I do something wrong? But no, we hadn't fought recently. Everything had seemed fine. I walked over to her, my steps slow and deliberate, my heart thudding in my chest. I tried to shake off the growing anxiety that was creeping over me, but it was no use. Something about this felt off. As I stood next to her, I noticed her phone screen, bright, a message popping up from an unknown number. I froze, not sure what to do. My eyes instinctively locked onto the text message, and I couldn't look away. It was short, but the words hit me like a ton of bricks. "I miss you. I can't wait to see you tonight." My stomach churned, and I felt the color drain from my face. It was like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the screen. But the silence in the room had become deafening. I had always trusted Emma, and I had never imagined that something like this could happen. But the truth was now staring me in the face, in black and white. There was no denying it. She was having an affair. My wife, the woman I had shared my life with for years, was seeing someone else. A surge of emotions hit me all at once: anger, disbelief, hurt, and confusion. I had to remind myself to breathe, my chest tightening with every breath. This couldn't be happening. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just seen. Was this just a mistake? Was it a joke? No. It couldn't be. The words were clear, and they were real. I stood there, frozen, my thoughts spinning in circles. My body felt heavy, like I was moving through water. The weight of it all was too much to bear. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this, right under my nose, without me having the slightest clue? It felt like my whole world was unraveling before me. I had always prided myself on being a good husband. I worked hard, provided for us, did everything I thought was necessary to make our marriage work. But this was something I never saw coming. Emma must have noticed that something was wrong because she finally looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. But there was no apology, no explanation, nothing. Just a long, painful silence. "You saw, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if she knew there was no point in denying it. Her words struck me like a punch to the gut. I nodded slowly, my throat tightening. I couldn't even speak. What could I say? What was there to say? I felt betrayed, but worse than that, I felt completely powerless, and that was just the beginning. The shock didn't wear off immediately. For days, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that there had to be some explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood the message, or maybe it was some kind of joke, a mistake. I wanted to believe Emma when she said it wasn't what it seemed. But deep down, I knew. I couldn't unsee what I had seen on her phone. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but I was losing control. My thoughts were racing, and I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was that message. The words echoed in my mind, each repetition more painful than the last. I miss you. I can't wait to see you tonight. I knew I couldn't just let it go. If she was having an affair, I needed to know the truth. I had to find out who this man was, what was going on, and how long it had been happening. The man behind those messages, whoever he was, had somehow managed to weave himself into my wife's life without me even noticing. The first step was to look for more clues. I started by going through Emma's things when she wasn't home, her phone, her emails, her social media. I hated myself for doing it, but I couldn't help it. The more I searched, the more questions I had. The more I uncovered, the more confused I became. There were no glaring signs of infidelity, but there were subtle things that didn't add up. I discovered that Emma had been texting this man frequently, often late at night when she thought I was asleep. She deleted the messages after reading them, but I still found traces, lingering like ghosts in the corners of her phone. The messages were cryptic, but they were enough to paint a picture of something deeper. He was clearly important to her, maybe even more than I had realized. I found an address in one of her old emails, an address that led to a house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. I could feel my pulse quicken as I thought about what it meant. Was this where they met? Was this where she had been spending time with him? The detective in me was awakened. And I couldn't stop myself. I had to find out everything. I started making excuses to stay out later, leaving work early, driving around town, trying to track down where she was going. It wasn't healthy, I knew that. I was becoming obsessed, but I couldn't stop. The more I uncovered, the more I needed to know. Then came the night that changed everything, the night of revelation. I had been following her for weeks now, hiding in the shadows, watching her movements, but still, I hadn't caught her red-handed. She had been careful, too careful. It was maddening, and I was beginning to feel like I was chasing something that didn't exist, that maybe I was just losing my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. That night, Emma told me she was going out with her friends. She had mentioned it in passing earlier that day, but she didn't give any details. Normally, I would have just nodded and said, "Have fun." But tonight was different. I had this gnawing feeling in my gut, this sense of urgency. I watched her get ready in the living room. She was beautiful, as always, but there was something different about the way she moved, the way she spoke. She seemed detached. The woman I had once known was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. She left around 7:30 p.m., looking effortlessly glamorous, but I noticed the way she checked her phone before she walked out the door. It was a small thing, but I had learned to pay attention to the smallest details. Something wasn't right. I gave her an hour before I decided to follow her. I parked a few streets away from our apartment, my heart pounding as I waited for her to drive past. When she finally did, I followed her. I couldn't believe what I was doing, but the need to know was overwhelming. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do when I found her, but I couldn't stop. She drove to that same house, the one I had found in her emails. I watched her pull up to the front of it, my breath catching in my throat. It was happening. She was meeting him here, the man behind the messages. I watched from a distance as she got out of the car and walked up the porch steps, her body language tense, as if she was trying to hide her excitement. I couldn't stay in the car anymore. I had to see what was going on. Slowly, I got out of the car and made my way to the back of the house, staying low, trying to be as quiet as possible. My heart was racing, and the adrenaline made my hands shake as I peered through a small window. What I saw next shattered everything I had believed about our marriage. The moment of truth. Inside the house, there he was. I hadn't recognized him at first, but now it was clear. It was Marcus, one of my closest friends, a guy I had known for years. We had shared beers together, talked about life, and confided in each other. I couldn't believe my eyes. This man, the one I had trusted, the one I had called a friend, was the same man who had been texting my wife. I watched in complete disbelief as Marcus and Emma embraced. She smiled up at him, and he kissed her. A deep kiss. The kind of kiss that should be shared between lovers, not friends. My stomach twisted, and I felt like I was going to be sick. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. This was the man she had been having an affair with, the man who had been a part of our lives for years. I felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal wash over me. Not just by her, but by him too. I had trusted Marcus. I had let him into our home, into our lives, and this was how he repaid me. For the next few minutes, I just stood there, frozen, watching them. They talked for a while, and then Emma led him upstairs. It was clear what was about to happen, and I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I turned away and walked back to my car, my mind reeling. I felt numb. My entire world had just crumbled in front of me, and I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. The drive back home was a blur. I barely remembered the road, the sounds, or even the air in my lungs. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart, so loud it drowned out everything else. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, but I barely felt the strain. My mind was elsewhere, spiraling into a whirlwind of thoughts. How long had this been going on? Why? How could she do this to me? I pulled into the driveway, parking in the usual spot. But for the first time, it felt wrong. The lights in the house were dim, casting long shadows that seemed to mock me. I didn't want to go inside, but I knew I had no choice. The truth was now undeniable, and I had to confront her. As I walked up to the door, I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I was about to do. Was I going to scream? Cry? Confront her with the evidence I had? Or would I just collapse, unable to process the betrayal? The weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on my chest. I opened the door slowly, almost cautiously, like I was walking into an unfamiliar place. Emma was sitting on the couch again, just as she had been when I first walked in after discovering the text. This time, though, she looked different. She seemed more at ease, but there was an underlying tension in the air, something I couldn't quite place. She looked up as I entered, her eyes meeting mine for a split second before quickly dropping down to the floor. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, almost too soft, like she was trying to sound casual. "How was your day?" I didn't answer immediately. I just stood there, staring at her, trying to read her face, looking for any signs of guilt, any trace of the woman I had known. But her expression was unreadable. That was when it hit me. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't seem sorry. If anything, she seemed relieved, like she had been waiting for this moment, expecting it. And that realization stung worse than anything. I swallowed hard, trying to force the words out. "Emma, we need to talk." She looked up, meeting my gaze now, and I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. It was as if she knew what was coming, as if she had prepared herself for this confrontation. But she didn't make a move to stop me. Instead, she just nodded, almost too calmly, as if she were bracing herself for something inevitable. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The words came rushing out, fueled by a mixture of hurt, anger, and disbelief. "I know about him. I know about Marcus." Her face immediately froze, the color draining from her cheeks. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something, apologize, anything to explain herself. But instead, she just stared at me, her lips parted slightly, like she was struggling to find the right words. I waited, but there was no apology. No explanation. Nothing. Finally, she sighed, the sound so soft it almost felt like a surrender. "I'm sorry," she said, but her voice lacked the sincerity I needed. It sounded rehearsed, like she was saying the words she thought she was supposed to say, not the ones that were actually coming from her heart. I shook my head, not sure if I could even look at her anymore. "Sorry. That's all you have to say? After everything? After everything I've done for you?" She stood up from the couch, moving towards me slowly, but I stepped back, instinctively putting distance between us. I didn't want her close. I didn't want her touch. It felt like everything had changed in an instant, and now, the person I had loved, the woman I had trusted, seemed like a stranger. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Let me explain. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. It just happened." I couldn't believe it. I had spent so much time defending her, protecting her, putting my trust in her. And now, this is what I got in return: a string of excuses, half-hearted apologies, and no real accountability. "I don't care about your excuses, Emma," I shouted, the anger bubbling to the surface. "I saw you. I watched you. You were with him. You were kissing him, like you've been doing it for months. Don't try to sugarcoat this, don't lie to me." The words seemed to hang in the air between us, and for a moment, everything felt frozen. Emma's face contorted in something that almost looked like regret, but it was fleeting. She took a deep breath and spoke again, her voice low. "I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened, okay? Marcus is different. He understands me in ways you don't. I didn't mean to fall in love with him. I swear, I didn't plan any of this. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could keep it from you. But I can't lie anymore." The confession hit me like a physical blow. She loved him. She loved Marcus. I staggered back as though I had been physically struck, my heart racing. All the years of love, trust, and intimacy between us suddenly felt like a distant memory. A lie. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship had just been destroyed. Emma reached out, her hand trembling, but I recoiled, not wanting to feel the warmth of her touch. I had never felt so repulsed by her in my life. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I'm sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this," but it was too late. There were no more apologies that could fix this. No amount of regret would change what had happened. I took a step back, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "How long has this been going on, Emma?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "A few months." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I turned away from her, my stomach twisting with a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. There was nothing more to say. I had already known what the truth was, but this wasn't the end. No. It couldn't be. I wasn't going to just let her walk away with no consequences. As I stood there in the dim light of the living room, I realized that the truth had only just begun to unravel. What Emma had done wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was that I now had to figure out what I was going to do with this new reality. I wasn't sure if I could forgive her. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air was thick, suffocating me, pressing down on my chest, making every inhale feel like a struggle. My mind raced, but it felt like I was running through molasses. Every thought, every memory of Emma, was now tainted. She had always been the one person I trusted completely, and now I was faced with the undeniable truth that everything I thought I knew about us was a lie. I walked out of the living room without saying another word. I didn't even know where I was going, but I needed to get away. I needed space, away from her, away from the house we had built together, away from everything that had just been shattered in an instant. I found myself in the kitchen, my hands gripping the counter as I tried to steady myself. The room felt like it was spinning, and I couldn't tell if it was the adrenaline, the anger, or the overwhelming sadness that had taken over my body. My legs felt weak, like they might give way beneath me at any moment. I just wanted to collapse. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to release the pressure that had built up inside me. But I couldn't. Not yet. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to gather my thoughts, but everything felt like a blur. My brain kept cycling through the same images: Emma with Marcus, their laughter, their shared intimacy, the kiss that had destroyed everything. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? Was I really that stupid? The self-doubt was crushing, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I didn't know who I was anymore. The person I thought I was, strong, dependable, and capable, felt like someone I could no longer recognize. I didn't know who I was without her by my side. I didn't know how to exist in this world, knowing that the foundation of my life had been built on lies. I heard footsteps behind me, and I tensed up, already knowing who it was. Emma. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes swollen from what I assumed had been crying. But I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not right now, please, she said, her voice shaking. Can we talk? Just let me explain everything. I closed my eyes, clenching my fists, trying to fight back the surge of emotions that threatened to spill over. What's there to explain, Emma? My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. You've already told me everything I need to know. You're in love with him. You've been lying to me for months. What else is there? She stepped closer, her eyes pleading, but I didn't want her near me. Not anymore. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, and this time, there was a tremor in her voice that almost made me believe her. But I couldn't let myself fall for it. Not again. Then why did you do it? I demanded, spinning around to face her, the anger bubbling up again. Why, Emma? If you didn't want to hurt me, why betray me like this? She took another step forward, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. It was never about you. I never meant for this to happen. But I've been feeling so lost. So disconnected for so long, and when I met Marcus, I don't know. It just felt like something I needed. Something that filled the gap I didn't even know was there. I could feel the rage bubbling up, but there was something else too, something deeper, something that terrified me. I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself. For being so blind, for ignoring the signs, for not seeing how miserable we had both become, but I couldn't let myself get caught up in her excuses again. Not this time. So, what now? What do you want from me? Do you want me to forgive you? To just move on and pretend like nothing happened? She didn't answer immediately, but I saw the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't have an answer. She didn't know what she wanted either. And that hurt more than anything. I don't know, she said quietly. I just want us to fix this. I don't want to lose you. You don't want to lose me? I repeated, disbelief coloring my words. You've already lost me, Emma. You don't get to decide that anymore. The words came out sharper than I intended, but they were the truth. The truth that had been sitting inside me like a poison, waiting for the moment to break free. She recoiled, her eyes filling with tears, but I couldn't care. I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her, not right now. Not after everything. You've ruined everything, I said, the weight of the words sinking in as I said them out loud. You've ruined us. I don't even know who I am anymore, Emma. I don't know who I'm supposed to be now. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven, but everything else in the room felt still, frozen in time. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand the hurt. The confusion, the pain of it all. Get out, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I need you to leave. I need time to think. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me, her face crumpled with the weight of everything she had done. And then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my thoughts, and just like that, everything changed. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the events of the last few hours, but all I could feel was emptiness. A hollow space where everything I had believed in had once existed, but this wasn't the end. Not for me. I wasn't going to just sit here and let this destroy me. I wasn't going to let her decision, her betrayal, be the thing that defined my future. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but one thing was clear: I was done. I was done with the lies, the deceit, and the woman who had shattered my trust. And no matter how much it hurt, I had to move on. I had to rebuild. The days after Emma left were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. It was as if my world had been stripped bare, and I was walking around in a daze, trying to put together the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. I kept replaying the moments with her, our arguments, her tears, her apologies, the sound of her voice begging me to understand. But what was the point? What was there to understand? She had made her choice, and no amount of tears or excuses could change that. I couldn't wrap my head around the betrayal. The anger I felt was like a heavy weight in my chest, suffocating me, but it wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something more cutting. Betrayal. It was on the fourth day after Emma left when I first saw him, Marcus. He walked into the coffee shop I frequented, as if it was any other day. He didn't notice me at first, his eyes scanning the room as he waited for his order. But when he turned, our gazes locked, and for a moment, time stood still. He froze. I wanted to look away, to pretend like I hadn't seen him, but I couldn't. The fury inside me flared up again, hotter than before. I wasn't sure what to do, whether to confront him, scream, or simply walk out. But before I could even process my thoughts, he took a step toward me. "Hey," he said cautiously, as if he wasn't sure how to approach me. "I didn't expect to see you here." I didn't respond immediately, my mind racing with the million things I wanted to say to him. How dare he show up here? How dare he act like everything was fine after everything that had happened? "What do you want?" I asked coldly. My voice sharper than I intended. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, looking around as if trying to figure out what to say. "Look, he started, but I cut him off. "No. You don't get to say anything to me. Not after everything. You've destroyed my life. You and her." His face faltered for a brief moment, and I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something else: defensiveness. "I never wanted to hurt you, man. I really didn't. This thing between me and Emma, it wasn't planned. It just happened." I stood up from my seat, the rage bubbling over. "It just happened. That's what you're going with? Do you even hear yourself right now?" The people around us began to notice the tension, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let him make this seem like some random accident. This wasn't just a mistake, it was calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he had no right to come here and try to justify it. Marcus opened his mouth to speak again, but I was already done listening. "I don't need your explanations. I don't need you to tell me how sorry you are. Because at the end of the day, you're just as much to blame as she is. You're both guilty." He looked down, his jaw tightening. "I know. And I'm sorry. But I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to apologize. For what it's worth, I wish things had gone differently." "Sorry doesn't fix this," I spat. "Sorry doesn't change the fact that you've taken everything from me. You've ruined everything." There was a long pause as I stared at him, waiting for some kind of response, but all I saw was a man who had no idea what to say, who had no words that could make this right. And that was the hardest part, the silence that hung between us, the weight of everything unsaid. But then, something unexpected happened. He took a step closer, his eyes softening, his posture less defensive. "Look, man, I get it. I do. But we're both caught in this mess. Emma, she was looking for something she wasn't getting from you. I don't know what it was. But what I do know is that I never meant for this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know what to do. The words didn't comfort me. They didn't erase the betrayal, the gut-wrenching pain that had become my constant companion. But there was something about the vulnerability in his voice that made me pause. For the first time since I'd learned about them, I saw Marcus not as an enemy, but as another person who had been dragged into this storm. It wasn't forgiveness. No, I couldn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever, but in that moment, I understood. He wasn't the villain here. Not entirely. The villain was the situation itself, the broken trust, the lies, the unmet needs. We were all victims of it. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. We stood there in silence for a few moments. Both of us processing the weight of the moment. Then, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, wondering if I had just experienced some twisted form of closure, or if it was just another step in the endless cycle of pain and confusion that had become my life. The days following my encounter with Marcus were some of the hardest. I tried to keep my distance from Emma, but it wasn't easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, the memories of everything we'd been through, and the heartbreak that still consumed me. But I was trying to hold it together. I wasn't going to let myself fall apart, yet, despite my efforts to distance myself from her, I found myself thinking about Emma constantly. My mind kept returning to the one thing that had haunted me for years, the emotional distance that had crept into our relationship long before I knew about Marcus. The late nights, the quiet dinners, the unspoken tension. I'd been so wrapped up in work, in life, that I had failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that, in some ways, I had been neglectful too. Not in the way Marcus had hurt me, but in the quiet ways that only someone who truly knew me could see. Emma had always been there for me, and I had taken her presence for granted. I'd been too focused on my own struggles, my own battles, to realize that she was slipping away. It wasn't until a late evening, after I'd come back from a run, still trying to outrun the demons in my head, that I found myself standing at her door. My hand hovered over the handle for a moment, unsure if I should knock. It had been days since I had spoken to her, since she'd left, and a part of me still couldn't fathom why I was here. But I couldn't stay away any longer. I needed closure. I needed answers. I took a deep breath and knocked. The door creaked open after a moment, and Emma stood there, looking as fragile as I felt. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying, but she didn't seem surprised to see me. She knew why I was here. "Hi," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't expect you to come by." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was expecting, but this wasn't it. This wasn't the confrontation I thought would happen. It wasn't filled with anger or accusations. Instead, there was a deep sense of weariness between us. We were both tired. Tired of fighting, tired of pretending. Tired of carrying all this hurt. "I need to talk," I said, my voice rough, not trusting myself to say anything else. Emma nodded and stepped aside to let me in. I entered the apartment, and it felt like time had slowed down. Every corner of the place we had once shared felt foreign, like a ghost of what it used to be. The furniture, the pictures, the little things that made it home, all of it now felt like a reminder of everything that had been lost. We sat down in the living room, the space between us palpable. There was an awkward silence as I searched for the right words to say. But no words felt right. No words could fix what had happened. Finally, Emma spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I don't even know how it did. I thought I was doing what was best for me. But I've hurt you more than I can explain." Her confession hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the way she said them, the raw emotion in her voice. For the first time in days, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with. She was still in there, buried beneath the shame. The guilt, and the mistakes she had made. "Do you love him?" I asked before I could stop myself. My voice trembled, and I hated myself for it. I hated that I still cared. I hated that I couldn't control the way my heart ached whenever I thought about her with someone else. Emma's eyes welled up with tears as she shook her head. No. I never loved him the way I loved you. I made a mistake. I thought I could find something in him that I didn't have with you. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to scream at her, to demand more answers, to make her understand the weight of the pain she had caused. But instead, I sat there, feeling something inside me snap. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, the question feeling like a knife in my chest. Why didn't you come to me, Emma? Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy? She was silent for a long time, and I saw her wrestle with the answer. I didn't know how, she finally said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you that I was losing myself. That I was lonely. I didn't want to hurt you, and I thought maybe I could fix it without you knowing. I didn't know how to process her words. I didn't know what to say, but I couldn't help the flood of emotions that rushed through me. Anger, sadness, regret, everything felt like it was drowning me at once. I was so selfish, she continued, her voice trembling now. I thought I could handle everything on my own, and I thought you didn't need me anymore. I thought you were too focused on other things to see what was happening to us. I wanted to scream, to let out the anger I had been holding inside for days. But the truth was, I couldn't. I couldn't because I understood. I understood what she was saying, even if it didn't excuse what she had done. I had been blind to her pain. Just as she had been blind to mine, I was so focused on my work, I muttered, my own voice breaking now. I didn't see you slipping away. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, both of us acknowledging the truth we had been avoiding. We had both failed. We had both let the distance between us grow so wide that it had become impossible to cross, but in that moment, something shifted. I wasn't sure what it was, but it felt like a turning point. Not a resolution, not an answer, but a recognition. We were both broken. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to fix it. The weeks that followed our conversation were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Emma and I had talked, cried, and apologized, but nothing had truly changed. The tension between us had not dissipated. We were still two people lost in a relationship that had been shattered by lies and misunderstandings. But we both tried, at least, I thought we did, we attempted to rebuild. We spent time together, went on small dates, tried to talk about our feelings and make plans for the future. But deep down, I knew we were just going through the motions. It wasn't real anymore. The love we once shared was no longer enough to erase the scars of betrayal. The truth had become painfully clear, I was holding on to something that no longer existed. I still loved Emma. That was undeniable. But love alone wasn't enough to heal the wounds she had inflicted. I couldn't just ignore the past and pretend that everything was fine. I wasn't the kind of person who could forgive so easily, and maybe that was my flaw. But I also wasn't the kind of person who could live in constant pain, constantly questioning whether she truly cared. As much as I hated to admit it, I knew that the best thing for both of us was to let go. We had both been holding on to a version of each other that no longer existed. And while that hurt more than anything else, it was the only way to move forward. One evening, as we sat in the same cafe where we had met weeks ago, the decision weighed heavily on me. Emma was talking about her day, her voice light, trying to make small talk, but all I could focus on was the emptiness that had settled in my chest. I waited for a moment of silence before I spoke, my voice quiet but firm. Emma, we need to talk. She stopped mid-sentence and looked at me, her expression changing to one of concern. What's wrong? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words I was about to say. I don't think we can fix this. I don't think we're meant to be together anymore. Her face fell, and I saw the hurt in her eyes. She opened her mouth to say something. But I raised my hand to stop her. I'm not blaming you, I continued. I'm not angry at you anymore. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And I don't think you can trust me, either. We've both hurt each other in ways that can't be undone. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. She didn't try to argue, didn't beg me to change my mind. Instead, she just sat there, looking at me, as if she, too, had known this moment would come. I know, she whispered finally. I've known for a while now that this was where we were headed. I could see it in her eyes, the same realization that had taken root in my heart. We were done. There was no going back from this. We sat in silence for a while, just absorbing the reality of what was happening. The weight of the words hung between us, and yet, as painful as it was, there was a strange sense of relief. I didn't have to keep pretending anymore. I didn't have to keep holding on to something that was already gone. And neither did she. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted things to end this way. I know, I replied softly. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, things just don't work out. We didn't speak much after that. The conversation was done. We both knew the truth, and there was no need for any more words. It was time to let go. The next few days were a blur. I moved out of the apartment we had shared, taking only what I needed. The once familiar space felt empty, like a part of me had been left behind. I felt like a stranger in my own life, unsure of who I was anymore, but there was a strange kind of peace that came with the decision. It wasn't an easy peace. It wasn't a happy peace. But it was a peace nonetheless. I had let go of the past. I had released myself from the weight of what Emma and I had been, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. As the days went by, I began to rebuild. Slowly, tentatively, but I started to pick up the pieces of my life. I threw myself into my work, found new routines, and started to rediscover who I was without Emma. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I missed her terribly, when I wondered if I had made the right choice, but deep down, I knew it was the only choice I could make. Love wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them go. I thought I had moved on. The months after the breakup were painful, but I was learning to live with it. I'd thrown myself into my work, made new friends, and started to feel like myself again. But just when I thought I was done with Emma, something unexpected happened. It was a normal Thursday evening when I received a message from her. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. The message was short, but it hit me like a punch in the gut. We need to talk. There's something I never told you. My heart raced. I hadn't expected this. What could she possibly want now? I had thought we had said everything that needed to be said, that we were both moving on with our lives. I hesitated for a long time before replying. I wanted to be strong, to tell her that I had moved on, that I didn't need anything more from her. But my curiosity got the best of me. I agreed to meet her. When I arrived at the cafe where we had met all those months ago, Emma was already sitting at a table. She looked different, tired, worn down. But there was something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. She was nervous, and that made my stomach twist. I didn't know if I should reach out to you, she began, her voice trembling. But there's something I have to tell you. Something I should have told you before. I sat down across from her, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. What is it? Emma took a deep breath. I didn't just cheat on you with Marcus. I was pregnant. I found out after we broke up. It was his child. The world around me seemed to tilt. I couldn't breathe. I stared at her, unable to process what she had just said. I didn't know what to do, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. I thought I had lost everything. But I couldn't tell you then. I wasn't sure what you would think. I've been keeping it a secret because I didn't want to hurt you more. I didn't want you to think. Her words blurred together. I couldn't process it. She had kept this from me, even after everything. She had carried Marcus's child, and never once told me. The shock and anger hit me all at once. How could she keep something like that from me? I didn't know how to feel. I was numb, but the pain started to seep in, and all I could do was stare at her. I didn't want to hurt you, she repeated, her eyes filled with tears. But I thought you had already moved on. I didn't want you to feel obligated to be a part of this. I couldn't speak. I couldn't make sense of any of it. I had been betrayed again, by the woman I had loved and trusted more than anyone. And now, she was asking for my forgiveness. I couldn't process the flood of emotions rushing through me. Emma's confession left me numb, but beneath the anger and betrayal, there was something else: exhaustion. I had spent months trying to move on, only to be dragged back into a web of lies and secrets. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. I needed to think, but my mind was a storm of confusion. Finally, I stood up, feeling the weight of everything I had just learned. Emma, I said, my voice low but firm. I can't do this. Not anymore. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. As I turned to walk away, I felt the final thread between us snap. There would be no more chances, no more second thoughts. I had given everything I could, and it still wasn't enough. It wasn't my fault anymore. It was time to truly let go. In the weeks that followed, I slowly began to rebuild, piece by piece. There was pain, but there was also freedom. The scars would never fully fade, but I knew I had made the right choice. I no longer carried the weight of someone else's decisions, and in the end, I realized that the hardest part wasn't losing Emma. It was finding the strength to walk away, even when every part of me still longed for her. But I did it. I found closure, and that was the beginning of my new chapter.